Chuck Schumer was scheduled to do a book tour in a number of cities on a book that he has authored on anti-Semitism. He has just canceled that book tour, we are learning, because of protests that were scheduled from activist groups who wanted to go after his decision to agree and allow the government funding bill to go forward to avoid a government shutdown. They were furious at his decision to do that.
You heard that right. Chuck Schumer's book tour was canceled because there were plans to protest him because he capitulated to Donald Trump. As Emma Vigeland pointed out, there were events scheduled in Baltimore, New York City, D.C., Philly, and San Francisco where you could pay him $56 to have him promote his book to you, which sounds like an excellent idea if you're an idiot. And people were undoubtedly planning to show up to these book tour events to protest him. But due to his own cowardice, he chose to cancel these events because he didn't want to face the people that he just betrayed. And what's even more insulting is that he's not even being honest about why he canceled his book tour. As Politico reports, the reason given for the cancellation was, quote, security concerns, which is an obvious lie. There are no security concerns. This is why he chose to cancel these events.
Selling out the people of DC and the people of this country. He's selling out working people, young people. He's not standing up.
We are here in front of Chuck Schumer's office to send a clear message that young people want him to stand up. Step up or step aside. Step up. Generation is away on you. Why are you here?
I'm here for all of the students, all the teachers in the schools that I was with who are going to get defunded by the things that are going on. Chuck Schumer needs to stand.
That right there is the security concern that his team cited. He is a coward who refuses to face his own constituents. That's what this is about. And a couple of weeks ago on MSNBC, he said that he himself planned on doing town halls in red districts, but the entire reason for him doing that was because Republicans like him didn't want to face their own constituents. So it's ironic that he is now in the same boat as these spineless Republicans. And I take it that he's going to postpone those town halls too, since he doesn't want to get reamed by working class people who are going to suffer because of what he just did to them. Now, make no mistake about it. This is a betrayal. I think you all know that, but this is indeed a betrayal, despite what he says. And even Donald Trump took to Truth Social to congratulate him on said betrayal and said that he had courage and did the right thing. But Chuck Schumer's not alone, because 9 other Democrats also voted for cloture, which paved the way for that disastrous continuing resolution, including Cortez Masto, Gillibrand, Durbin, Hassan, King, Fetterman, Peter, Schatz, and Shaheen. And I take it that none of these cowards plan to hold town halls for a while because they're also going to be too afraid to face their constituents, like those Republicans who don't want to hold town halls as well, because they know if they show up, they're going to get yelled at by constituents because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is representing the people who put them in office. In fact, we know that John Fetterman in particular is dodging his constituents because they've been contacting his office to try to encourage him to hold a town hall, and they're now having to resort to a pressure campaign on a Pennsylvania subreddit since he's refusing to schedule a town hall on his own. I wonder why. But while he dodges his own constituents, it's funny that he's talking tough on television to reporters. Here's what he said when he was asked about House Democrats who are mad about his betrayal.
We've heard Democrats in the House really upset about Schumer's move, the progressive base, also a Democratic base. What do you think it says about the Democratic Party?
I'm terrified to know that they're angry or frustrated. Well, yelling on social media isn't leadership. Okay, I'll be the Democrat that's not going to pander, and I'm going to tell you the truth. And if you think shutting the government is smart, then I thought you're not supposed to get in a war when there's no exit plan. You know, guess what? They're going to realize that the exit ramp is owned by the GOP.
This man's brain is basically tapioca pudding. And even though he's trying to portray his capitulation as 4D chess or him being the adult, what he did screws over the people that voted to put him in that position. Let me explain it. Republicans created this continuing resolution without any input from Democrats whatsoever. And by voting for cloture, he effectively voted for that continuing resolution that hurts his constituents. If you shut down the government, you force Republicans to come to the table to negotiate with you, which gives you the chance to at least strip out some of the most harmful provisions, at least try to rein in Doge or Donald Trump. But he didn't do that. And now He's mad at the people who are mad at him for bending the knee to fascists. But let's be honest, John Fetterman voted for cloture because he wanted that continuing resolution to pass, despite what he says, despite him voting against the continuing resolution itself. Because if you vote for cloture, you allow it to pass. That's what he did. So let's stop pretending like this so-called opposition party is opposed to the Republican agenda, because they're not. Democrats, for all intents and purposes, are controlled opposition at this point, and their ability to resist fascism hinges on what their donors allow them to do. And I'm assuming that their Wall Street donors didn't want the additional market volatility a shutdown would bring, so they told Democrats to capitulate, and some of them did just that. I'm 99% certain that that's what happened. And I wish that they just admit that, or admit that they agree with the continuing resolution and what Republicans want to do, because the political theater isn't fooling anyone anymore. In fact, to Schumer's credit, he pretty much showed his cards a long time ago when he locked arms with fascists at a pro-genocide rally.
We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel.
That's the leadership to the so-called resistance, my friends. They're locking arms with fascists in support of a rogue state committing a genocide. And to go back to Schumer's book for a moment, that book in and of itself is in service to Trump's fascist agenda. Because if you look at the synopsis for the book on its publisher's page, it says it's about anti-Semitism in America from the 1960s and 70s to present day, and it includes Chuck Schumer's personal experiences, which I think is fine in theory in a vacuum, but if you look at some of the examples of anti-Semitism, you begin to see what this is really about. Jewish synagogues and their congregates are targeted and sometimes killed by extremists. Jewish students are harassed and attacked on campus. Conspiracy theories about Jews have gone mainstream on social media, and debates over Israel have veered into dangerous territory. So he's mixing actual violent anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, which is dangerous because those are two different things. And he's claiming that Jewish students were harassed on college campuses during the anti-genocide protests, and I'm assuming that he's not even going to bring up the fact that Jewish students were some of the organizers that led those encampments. And I'm also assuming that he's not going to talk about the differences between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And the reason why this matters so much now more than ever is because the Trump administration is targeting students that participated in those anti-genocide protests, and they're invoking anti-Semitism to justify the deportation of these student protesters. One of them, for example, is Mahmoud Khalil. Republicans aren't even arguing that Khalil committed a crime. They're saying that he doesn't deserve due process and should be deported because he led a campus protest that made Jewish students feel unsafe. But in letters to the court on Khalil's behalf, Jewish students said the opposite. One person wrote to the court saying, "I witnessed firsthand Mahmoud's unwavering commitment to protecting Jewish students. When an unaffiliated individual began shouting anti-Semitic slogans, Mahmoud was the first to intervene, immediately de-escalating the situation and ensuring the safety of those present. This came as no surprise. I already knew that Mahmoud was someone I could trust to stand up for me and my community." So this anecdote explains that what Republicans are using as a justification to punish people like Mahmoud is not actually true. Now, this doesn't mean that there weren't instances of anti-Semitism at these protests. Of course, that's possible. But erasing the participation of Jewish students and portraying the movement more broadly as inherently anti-Semitic was a tactic used by politicians and media to shut down the conversation about what the students were actually protesting, which was Israel's genocide of Gaza. And Chuck Schumer intended on bolstering this narrative with his dumbass book, which is going to provide political cover to Trump's administration, who is currently illegally punishing students for exercising their First Amendment rights. So let's be clear. The reason why so many of these Democrats refuse to stand up to fascists is because they simply agree with a lot of what the fascists are doing, period. And thankfully, voters are finally beginning to see that, which is resulting in support for the party completely collapsing. Just take a look at the party's overall approval rating per CNN.
Americans' favorable views of the Democratic Party's brand are at a record low, just 29%. That's compared to 36% for Republicans. It is the lowest ever recorded for Democrats in CNN polling, going back more than 30 years. As you can see, the party's numbers dropping a staggering 20 points in just 4 years. The CNN SRSR's poll also found 57% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning voters are more interested in seeing their party leaders stop the GOP agenda, compared to 42% who are more interested in cutting bipartisan deals.
And look, I'm sure it's only going to get worse since leadership is bringing down the entire party. And you know it's bad when Nancy Pelosi and Neera Tanden and even liberal influencers like Olivia Giuliana and Will Stancil are condemning Chuck Schumer here. Because I think that as much as liberals and leftists fight within the party, we can all agree that we want somebody who's going to fight Donald Trump and the fascists. That's the bare minimum. So if you won't even do the bare minimum, it's time to go. So, in some ways, it feels like this might be a turning point for the party because there's so much outrage towards leadership in particular. But the question is, how long will the Democratic Party's base stay this mad? Because for years, Democrats have skated by simply because they're not Republicans. So the question is, will the better Democrats actually harness this energy from the base and force the party to go in a different direction? Force the party to go in a different direction, specifically by calling for new leadership? Right now, it's clear that the base wants a change in leadership. Groups like Indivisible also are calling for Schumer to step aside. And when you take into account how low the party's overall approval rating is, members of Congress who actually care could use this as an opportunity to get better leadership. And it's clear that they think Chuck Schumer isn't cutting it. For example, Senator Michael Bennet in particular was especially critical of Schumer because of his leadership or lack thereof, as CNN reports.
In one notable moment, I'm told that Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, who has not been shy about his frustration with his party leadership in the past, erupted during one of those meetings. Two sources familiar with the moment tell CNN that Senator Bennet accused the Senate Democratic leadership, his leadership, of having, quote, no strategy, no plan, and no message on this spending bill.
So there's that. Also, Hakeem Jeffries, who himself is facing calls from the base to step aside from leadership, isn't stepping in to save Chuck Schumer.
Is it time for new leadership in the Senate?
Next question.
Mr. Leader.
And to be clear, even though he didn't say yes, him not saying no is still pretty significant. So the tides have clearly turned against Chuck Schumer, and the better Democrats now have a window of opportunity to act, to take the party in a new direction, to seize on the anger and harness the rage of their base and publicly call for Schumer's resignation now that there's momentum for just that. The question is, will they do that? And the answer seemingly is no. And I say this because Chris Murphy, for example, is one of the loudest Democrats who's in opposition to Schumer's strategy of capitulation, and he urged Democrats to go in a new direction himself after the last election. But when he was asked whether or not he still supports Chuck Schumer in leadership, his answer was very, very disappointing.
Do you think that Leader Schumer is the best person to lead your caucus in this moment?
Senator Schumer certainly can lead this caucus.
Is he the best person?
He can lead this caucus, but we need to have a conversation inside the caucus about whether we are willing to stand up to Republicans.
Do you have confidence in Leader Schumer?
I still support Senator Schumer as leader, but I think the only way that we are going to be effective as a caucus is if we change our tactics, and we have to have a conversation inside our caucus to make sure that we are going to do that.
So he's still supporting Schumer, despite disagreeing with Schumer's strategy, despite saying Democrats should embrace a Bernie Sanders style of populism after the election. He's saying, let's just keep doing the same thing and hope something changes. Now, to be clear, I have no faith in somebody like Chris Murphy. He himself is a corporate Democrat, but what sets him apart at a minimum is that it does seem like he's willing to fight Republicans. That's like the least thing that we should expect. Like, we shouldn't even have to expect it. It should just be automatically assumed that all Democrats are going to do what they can to save the Republic as Trump threatens the Republic. But yet, let's keep going with Chuck Schumer, the worst possible person for this moment to lead the party. Yeah, but Chris Murphy is not an outlier, because when he was asked about whether or not he'd be interested himself in leadership, he seemed to suggest that the rest of the party wasn't even having a conversation about a change in leadership at all.
Many of your supporters responded online saying you should replace Leader Schumer. Is that something that you would consider? Would you consider that role?
I mean, I don't think anybody's having that conversation right now. What's important is that we meet this moment.
To be fair, he could mean that nobody's having that conversation about him being the leader in particular, but the way that I kind of interpreted that was we're not having a conversation as a party about a new leader, which would be wild if that's not a conversation that they're having right now. And it would demonstrate that even the less bad Democrats who want to fight fascists are still painfully out of touch. Because a leadership change is the bare minimum right now as far as I'm concerned. But even though there's a lot of momentum in that direction, it just seems like, once again, Democrats aren't willing to seize on that opportunity. Even Bernie Sanders isn't explicitly calling on Chuck Schumer to step down. In a tweet about the situation, he writes, quote, "The Democratic Party needs a major transformation. It can no longer be a top-down billionaire-funded consultant-driven party. It must be a multi-generational, multiracial working-class party. In a time of growing oligarchy and authoritarianism, that's the only path to victory." And while I agree with everything Bernie Sanders said there, it'd still be worthwhile to use that opportunity to also call for Chuck Schumer to step down as a senator. I mean, that alone obviously isn't going to facilitate the change that Bernie Sanders is calling for, because I think the party's just too corrupt to change at this point. But even a small change, like a new leader, could at least help mitigate some of the damage that Trump is doing if we get a leader who actually is going to fight at least a little bit more than Schumer, which is no fight. But since nobody's willing to come out and say it, what I fear is that anger towards Chuck Schumer is just eventually going to die down, and that this conversation about him stepping down will, for the most part, just go away. Not even going to come up a month from now. And I say that because another Democratic Party traitor, Jared Moskowitz, who recently voted to censure Al Green, was brought on for an interview with the Midas Touch, and the host didn't even bother to ask him about his traitorous vote to censure his own colleague at the behest of Donald Trump. But the commenters, they didn't forget. The comments also brought up how disappointed they were with the host for not bringing up his decision to side with fascists that he's now criticizing in this video. On top of that, in an interview with Richie Torres, David Pakman didn't bother to ask him a single hard-hitting question about his numerous betrayals, his vote to censure his own colleague Rashida Tlaib, or his vote to send more weapons to a genocidal state in violation of the Leahy law, or about his support for sex pest Andrew Cuomo in New York City's mayoral race. So I mean, if nobody with influence or power is willing to hold bad Democrats accountable, nothing is going to fucking change. Why even have a platform if you're not going to use it to speak truth to power? I mean, I understand that access is important if you have this influence, but like, maybe just assume that you're only going to get one interview and use it to challenge people in power. I'm not expecting you to yell at them, but I mean, the bare minimum is asking at least a mildly confrontational question, but we don't even get that from liberal media. That's not mainstream. So, you know, over the years, Democratic Party electeds have learned that their betrayals, they just eventually are forgotten if they just wait long enough. I mean, Andrew Cuomo, brought him up. You know, he just waited a couple of years after being a sex pest and after letting people die who were his constituents, who were in elder care facilities during COVID. Just that all water under the bridge, I guess. So it's a problem. And Democrats think that if they just wait long enough, especially seeing how bad Republicans are by comparison, people are just going to forget all of the bad things that they do. That is a fucking problem. That is in part how we got to this point, because the Democrats are never held accountable for capitulating or outright siding with fascists. They think that you're always going to forgive them for their transgressions because that's always been the case. But now is the time for voters to remember that these people are traitors. And you should never forget that. Now is the time to start reminding these assholes that they work for you, and you're not going to accept their betrayals any longer. And until these Democrats, like the Republicans at those town halls, understand this, they're never going to change. So I'm calling on voters, Democratic Party supporters, to take their power back and run this party the way that they want it to be run. Dictate the terms of this, and don't let them dictate the terms to you. So let this be a reminder that you should never, ever, ever let these Democrats off the hook when they screw you over. But for some levity, I wanted to share a piece of information about Chuck Schumer that truly demonstrates how out of touch he is with his own base. So this Twitter user shared an excerpt from an old profile of Chuck Schumer from The New Yorker, and it talks about his imaginary friends. I'm not joking. Schumer says that he is accompanied everywhere he goes by two imaginary middle-class friends who advise him on all manner of middle-class concerns. Their names until recently were Joe and Eileen. He later goes on to say that they worry about terrorism and about values, and they are patriots. Joe takes off his cap and sings along with the national anthem before the the occasional Islanders game. He elaborated that they're not ideologues. They're worried about property taxes. It's the taxes they hate, and that's what Democrats don't get. And they also both defend the CIA's Human Intelligence Program. In other words, this multimillionaire motherfucker is so out of touch, he had to concoct imaginary friends who are middle class to guide his decision making as a member of Congress, as opposed to, I don't know, just actually talking to middle class people. That is the kind of person who is leading the Democratic Party. This is the leader of the resistance, folks. This is who's supposed to protect us from fascist authoritarianism. We are not in good hands. And on that note, Alex, aka LOL Overruled, did an impression of Schumer's resistance to Trump, and I think that he nailed it.
What did he do? You better not do that, Mr. President. He did what? Oh my God. He can't do that. Somebody's got to stop him. Mr. President, you can't do that.
Uncanny. But even though he's joking, I need you to understand that the actual resistance offered by Chuck Schumer is even more comical than that, more comical than a literal parody. Because during Trump's first term, I want to remind you that before another potential shutdown, Chuck Schumer confronted Donald Trump by reminding him about the Pinocchios given to him by the Washington Post.
The Washington Post today gave you a whole lot of Pinocchios because they say you constantly misstate how much the wall is built, how much of the wall is built, and how much is there. But that's not the point here. We have a disagreement about the wall, whether it's effective or whatever. Not on border security, but on the wall.
He literally told Trump about the Pinocchios the Washington Post gave him. What the fuck? That's him standing up to Donald Trump. That's literally the best that we get from Democratic Party leaders. So, I still can't get over it. In conclusion, if this is the resistance, we are all fucking doomed. So call your senator and let them know politely that you want them to call on Chuck Schumer to step down from leadership so we all can survive, maybe a little bit longer. You know, it's not going to solve all of our problems if we do get a leadership change, but almost anyone would do a better job than Chuck Schumer. So even a marginal improvement could make a huge difference at this point. Like, that's how bad things are, but you know, if not, then let's just have him remind Trump about the Pinocchios that he's going to get again. That'll do it, I'm sure.
Do yourself a favor and click the join button on YouTube to become a member. Because Mike's doing a great job getting to watch his videos before everyone else is tremendous. Many people are saying this. Join today, folks. You won't regret it.